This is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele in Tokyo. Mulele's place again. Much more conducive to guests than my place is. My place is a closet. So we've got 4 more comics from the comics events here in Tokyo last fall. Cat and Kaigai. And let's start with this one. So this is Himawari Share Volume 1 from Harmony Becker. And this is about a young woman named Nao who was born in Japan, and it's not clear, but I gathered that her father might be American. Her mother is clearly Japanese, and when she was a young child, her family moved to the U.S., and now she's coming back to Japan, and meeting people here. She's staying in a share house. That's the title of the book, Himawari Share. That's the house she's staying in, and getting to know the people that she's living with there. That's a lot of the book, and that's fine. And of course, there are the bits of Japanese culture, like going to a festival and whatever. What I found most interesting about this is the take on how she's kind of coming back and trying to rediscover the Japanese side of her. She's forgotten a lot of her Japanese that she spoke fluently when she was, I don't know, maybe 5 years old. And she realizes she kind of misses that part of herself. And it seems to be frustrating for her that she used to be able to speak and understand Japanese, and now not so much. And I like the way that that Harmony Becker illustrated that in the book. How she illustrated, like, not being able to catch all of the Japanese that she's hearing by showing the Japanese and then the English translation under it, but part of it's kind of erased.
Yeah.
And I know how that goes. I can catch some words, but other parts, like, I don't know that word.
Actually, that was really creative. I really like that part.
And she remembers one time when she was little and maybe in Japan, and her mom is speaking Japanese to her, and now that feels like kind of that part of her is missing. So, yeah, I mean, this is fairly interesting. I don't know if Volume 2 is available yet, but maybe I would check it out. What did you think?
I liked it, and it kind of it didn't feel like it at first, but halfway through it began to feel like I was reading some sort of shoujo manga. And then I kind of realized, yeah, it has the screen tone patterns. It has the same kind of setup. It's not quite as detailed as some of the girls' comics that I've seen, either in layout or in background details for some of the parts. But I liked the story a lot, and I thought it was kind of, she used to speak fluently, but when it comes to starting her Japanese classes, she gets put in the lowest level class. Which, that's gotta hurt, and to the point where she actually breaks down in the comic, because she feels really disconnected. I thought it was an excellent first book. I don't know where Volume 2 is, Now, where did you get this?
This was Kaigai.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this year's Kaigai.
So is the artist in Japan now or no?
I should have gone back and listened to the interview again when she was on Deconstructing Comics. Looking at her Instagram, I can't really tell if she, where she's located now. See if I can find something else here, but I am not sure where she's located.
Okay, well, I mean, as far as the story itself, it's not quite my story, but from what I've seen of my life in Japan and the lives of people around me in my early 20s, it's fairly accurate. The share house thing, the language school thing, all of the Japanese parts are in perfect Japanese.
The Facebook page for The Art of Harmony Becker says she's based in Columbus, Ohio.
Okay. But still, very, very nice work.
Yeah. Another take on living in Japan, which resonates more with our own experience, Teach English in Japan, Volume 1, by Jonathon, Dalton, and Jeffrey Ellis, who I take it are both Canadian. And so this is a story about a guy named James from Vancouver who decides to go to Japan and teach English, and the school messes up a number of things, starting with meeting him at the airport, and then he's sent to a small town which, as far as we could tell, is fictional, called Myori, and so it's just kind of about his adventures teaching English in Japan, or getting set up in that situation. I mean, I'm sure there's more. There's not very much classroom stuff in here. I'm sure there will be in Volume 2. And it pretty much rang true with me, although there were a few places where I thought, like, I could have seen additional problems that they could have gotten to that they didn't.
I think if they had gone through every single problem that would probably happen in this situation, you never would have gotten out of the airport.
Yeah, exactly. Because the one thing I thought of was something I've experienced from the other end, not myself, but from the other end more than once, I think, is someone tries to call me from Narita Airport. They put 10 yen in the phone.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Yeah.
I get a phone call of like 15 seconds and then they're just cut off.
Yeah.
No operator asking in any language that you add money. It's just, you're off. Because it's different from how payphones work in America, and they don't realize how far they are from actual Tokyo.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there could have been even more complications if you wanted to slow the comic down to a crawl. But, yeah, for the most part, it rang pretty true.
Yeah, I found myself much more frustrated with this one because, unlike Himawari Share, it is a story about English teachers. Mm-hmm. And I went that route, and I hated that job. And as soon as they get into the school, and you kind of see the shake and bake nature of the system that they're in, it just reminds me of so many different schools that I've worked at. And I even commented to you that, man, seeing this comic, I never want to do this shit again. And yeah, it's fine if you're in for a year or two at the most. But if you're planning on living here long term and you start teaching English for 5 years, 10 years, suddenly there's nothing else you can do except teach English. And unless that's something you actively want to do in your career, yeah, it's a hard place to be. Mm-hmm. And so, kind of reading this comic, I'm kind of looking back at my own life and thinking, man, you know, it's a choice between like working at an English school and being homeless, and or at least it was for me at the time. And if I knew then what I know now, it would have been a tougher choice. Because yeah, I'm not about the English schools.
There's some nice little touches in here, so there's another character whose name is also James, and he needs to use the restroom, and he goes into a shop and thinks that he has to buy something so he can get the key to the restroom. Yeah. But not knowing that it doesn't work that way in Japan. You can just use the restroom.
Yeah.
So yeah, cultural differences.
Some of the convenience stores in Japan actually advertise that they have a restroom, especially if you're on like one of the national highways. Big signs saying restroom, cigarettes, alcohol. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're very, very open. Of course, you go to Roppongi or any of the clubbing areas, no restrooms available for anyone. I think gets too wild there. But that subplot with the two Jameses and the way it's leading into like here's a comparative look at two different experiences. Yeah, I actually quite like that, and that's the saving grace of the book for me. Because I mean, although there's nothing wrong with the story of a foreigner coming to Japan and teaching English and kind of going through that whole rigmarole, for me it hits a little too close to home. So having this kind of like confusion. Yeah.
So it gives you some PTSD, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it does, very much, very much. I wasn't thinking about that at all with Himawari.
It's a trigger.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, English teaching English books, comics, just trigger me every time. And I think last year when we were talking about Ian M's book.
Yeah, the one with the horror comic cover.
Yeah, I'm an alt.
I'm an LT, yeah.
Yeah. That one threw me into a 20-minute rant on the podcast about English teaching and how fucked up it all was. But, yeah, I'm still kind of there. So it's difficult for me to read these, but the book itself is actually quite good, well presented. They edited when they needed to edit to get the story going. Mm-hmm. And the subplot is nice.
Okay, another one that's taking a look at a little bit different aspect of Japan, Spaboon, #1, by Chris Carlier. We've talked about some of his other work before. I believe we talked about Little in Japan.
I don't know if we actually... Did we actually talk about that one? I don't remember reading that.
I feel like we did. I have to go back and look.
Yeah, I don't think I read that one.
I mean, certainly we've talked about... Or I have talked to him at the shows for the podcast, so listeners have heard him.
I walked by his table once, and he handed me a card. That's about as far as it went.
But yeah, I think I talked to him at Kaigai this year and last year. I think I talked to him at CAT last year, too.
Yeah, I saw him at CAT. I didn't see him at Kaigai.
I think he's been on the podcast 3 times. Anyway, so this is about not about foreigners coming to Japan, but about mascot. And of course, mascots are a big thing in Japan for almost any kind of business or cities, the police department, and pretty much anything has a mascot. So this is a mascot for a pharmaceutical company who is a combination of a spoon and a baboon, reference to the name of the company, Saruhashi Pharmaceuticals. Saru means monkey. Yeah. And I believe Chris told me that he knew someone whose last name was Saruhashi, and that was kind of the inspiration.
Well, the president of Nova when it went bankrupt was Sadahashi.
That's who it was. Okay.
Yeah, I used to work with that guy. Actually, I worked for him, and I worked next to him when I worked at Nova back around the year 2000. And it seemed like a nice enough guy. You know, a couple of years later, he's trying to avoid getting arrested by running around the country.
Yeah, this was an English school chain that went bankrupt? Or?
It went bankrupt, but it went through 6 months of not paying the teachers before it went bankrupt. And that is that is illegal in Japan. And as the CEO of any company, not just English teaching, if you don't pay your employees, they will arrest you and haul you off to jail. So he got hauled away. Didn't matter that he was rich.
And then for some reason somebody thought, we want this a known name, so they bought the name to Nova, and there's a Nova English School again.
Yeah, it's actually like a yakiniku restaurant, a Korean barbecue restaurant in Nagoya that bought them, I understand. But anyway, yeah.
Anyway, so Spaboon. Saruhashi merges with another pharmaceutical company, and they decide to go with the other company's mascot, who is a walking medicine capsule called Captain Capsulu. And so Spaboon is the victim of a layoff and ends up going through some various adventures with some environmentalists slash druggies. Interesting. I thought it was kind of amusing. The art style is a little. Some of the mascots shown in here are a little grotesque.
It's kind of a grotesque idea.
I thought it was amusing. Now, before you reread it just now, you told me you weren't so keen on it. How do you feel now that you've reread it?
Okay. Well, the first time I read like maybe the first 10 pages, and we kind of ran out of time. So this reread is actually a complete read. And the design of and the concept of Spaboon is offensive to me.
Why?
It doesn't make sense, and it's absurdist, and I was so put off by it that I read the first 10 pages and I'm like, fuck this comic, man, I hate this shit, this is garbage. But having read to the end, it won me over. I have to say, it won me over in a couple of ways. Number one, it's the style of artwork is very reminiscent of kind of 60s underground American comics. Kind of the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers come to mind.
Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. Yes.
Yeah, Fabulous Furry Brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, it reminded me of that, and you could really see where it starts to go in that direction when kind of the pacing of the book, but also the some of the adventures that Spaboon gets up to with the
environmentalists.
Yeah, the environmentalists
/ druggies.
Yeah, some of that stuff seemed very inspired by that whole movement of comics from the 60s, but and I like that part quite a bit. The stuff at the beginning, and again, this is it because of the name Saruhashi and because of the corporate nature of the situation he was dealing with, triggered me again towards Nova and English teaching and all of that shit, and knowing that Chris Carlier does an English teaching comic called
Little in Japan.
I was going to say Big in Japan, but Little in Japan, which I have not read for obvious reasons.
Another trigger.
Yeah, it was kind of grating a little bit, but as soon as we moved out of that situation and started getting into the environmentalist, druggy side of the book, I began to relax and I began to understand a little bit more about where the inspiration for this was coming. I would say my only thing about it is that we come to the end of the book, and the ending seems a little bit abrupt and ironic, which I think is fine, but it didn't seem to have quite a point.
I know what you mean. I wanted a little more at the end.
Yeah, yeah. It's just like, okay, so what happens after this? Like what? And there's no hint at the future of Spaboon. There's
only what he's not going to do, but what is he going to do?
Yeah, exactly. And I felt that part to be a little bit unsettling. I wanted to kind of know a little bit more. So, I don't know, Spaboon 2, waiting for it. I'll read it with a more of an open mind, unless he gets on a plane and flies to Japan to become
an English teaching combination spoon and baboon.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never had sex with a spoon, but I don't think it would work if I did. Yeah.
Well, I think your English teaching experience was much worse than mine. I think I got off easy.
Well, I think that the end of my English teaching experience was so abrupt that and so rage-filled and so hard to deal with that it kind of left me spinning. And when I finally wound down and actually looked at my life, I look back at 20 years of this nonsense and just think, my fucking God, I should have a career in comics or some other thing that I should look at, but no, I've got this like 25 years of just teaching. It's like, that's not why I came to Japan.
It had something to do with manga, didn't it?
Yeah. Oh, fuck, my life. What was I doing? I mean, there's a whole bunch of other reasons why it went that way. Marriage, kids, divorce. But the upshot is that I'm now kind of out of that and I'm trying to deal with that stuff. So, but still, in the meantime, it's like a guy with PTSD reading war comics. Mm-hmm. It's just why? Yeah.
Okay. Mulele picked up this other publication from Natalie Andrewson that has no title on the publication itself. Looking at her online shop, it's identified as Florida Folding Zine and Poster. And what it is, it's a folded up strip of paper, maybe about 14 inches long and about 4 or 5 inches tall, divided into 4 panels and folded in the gutters. So there's 4 panels of comic on this side, and the other side is the poster. It's a long poster of this character, who I guess is her, asleep on the tropical island that's shown. Or tropical island, or, well, supposedly she's in Florida. I gathered that this was based on a dream. I feel like she might have said so when I talked to her at Kaigai. And it certainly reads like a dream. But then, she's leaning against a palm tree asleep on the poster side. And, I mean, it's a dream. It's a little story. I like that that first panel, she says, I hadn't ever seen a Star Wars, so as punishment, I was banished to Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's kind of green-yellow color scheme. I'm sure this is risograph again.
Yeah.
What did you think of this?
Well, I bought it.
Yeah.
And I, of course, looked at it and said, oh, shit, a mini story with some beautiful artwork on the back, 2-color risograph from Natalie Andrewson. I must buy. And so I bought it, and I don't remember exactly how much it was. How much is it on the website?
Oh, I'll look it up. Go ahead.
Yeah. But got it home after my day was done, and read through it, and was kind of like, eh. And
$5.
yeah. So, it was like 600 yen in Japan, so that's fair. And I kind of remembered paying about that much and felt overpriced. This is one piece of paper, I'm paying 600 yen for it, and blah, 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 and all this stuff. But, when I think about it, what is the difference here between comics and art, and what have I bought here? I've bought a bit of handcrafted art, and I should not look at it as X number of pages equals a certain amount of value, or
how satisfying the story is.
Yeah, and this is a little bit of a thought, an idea, with art attached to it. She made this, and I do think it is worth the money if you are a fan of her work. And I am a fan of her work. I said in our last review about her work that I was a little bit disappointed by the interior artwork because the outer cover artwork was so beautiful. And I stand by that. The artwork here is also very nice. And I like it. I'm glad I have it. I am a poor man buying comics, so sometimes I feel a little bit that the price point hurts. But I should say it is not unfair for what it is. These are comics made by the artist in what I'm assuming is small batches, and I think that's fine. If this was put out by Marvel, it should be a freebie.
Yeah, I'm sure it would be. Free comic book day.
Yeah. I think actually having Marvel comics of this type would be interesting. Spider-Man has a thought, thinks about some other stuff based on that first thought, then a picture on the back, him hanging out in the city in a spiderweb hammock high above the city. But it'll never happen. So what I've got here is a comic that is uncommissionable. And that's what I strive for.
We got mail from one of the Kaigai and Cat creators that we talked about. So Ian M., creator of Do You Remember Cobot, commented on Facebook. Thanks for the review. I think you understood it well enough. I wanted to do a sci-fi nostalgia take on Howdy Doody or something equally forgotten. I wonder how much of my childhood stuff will be known when I'm 60-something, not counting things Disney owns. Then I just had to dress it up. Cobot equals Koban robot, Koban being a police box in Japan, one for each neighborhood. I imagine after that the robots became less anthropomorphic and were used more as assistants to human police, but that sort of thing isn't so important to the story. So I'm still not quite following this. So I read the story as being that they were simultaneously police assistants and pop culture characters. But it sounds like he's saying that Cobot was a pop culture character first and then a police assistant. But if it was solely a pop culture character at the beginning, why were there so many of them? why would they make a fleet of them? Maybe for public appearances? I don't know, like in different parts of Japan?
Well, one for each neighborhood kind of thing, I think.
But, yeah, one celebrity per neighborhood? If it's there for police work, sure, but if it's there to be a celebrity...
Well, I mean, it's I think a little bit different than having like a Beyonce on every corner or something. But I think just as an omnipresent person or thing or face that you trust, you can go to, that is always there, is always around. I can kind of see that. It's, I think because it has a very simplified human face, an overly simplified human face, that there's an amount of trust there that you'd have over someone who has a real face, and maybe doesn't look exactly the way you think a good person should look, for whatever reason. His eyebrows are too thick, or he's got a mustache, or whatever the case. I mean, there are some traits in Japan that are specifically to that point. If I miss shaving, people look at me like I'm homeless. So, in that sense...
It's the opposite of Portland.
Opposite of Portland? Everybody needs a beard, otherwise they...
Yeah, especially if you're under 30 years old.
If you're clean shaven, you must have work problems. But
and you're not getting the chicks.
But, yeah. Anyway. But just as far as having that kind of standardized face that you trust, it's kind of like Mickey Mouse, I guess. But I can kind of see that as being okay. It's like seeing Coca-Cola billboards or other commercials everywhere on a train. They don't just have one commercial like in one spot there.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe not every single neighborhood, but if having multiple ones, maybe it would be kind of like how in Japan things like the whatever they are this year, Power Rangers characters. They'll make public appearances at festivals or whatever, but it's just who knows who that is in the costume, because you can't see any part of their face.
True.
And the voices are all recorded back in the studio in Tokyo.
Yeah.
So, you can have the same set of Rangers appearing in 25 different places at the same time.
Yeah.
So maybe the cobots could be used that way. That might be the reason for having multiple ones, but...
Yeah, could be that as well. But it wasn't so much of an issue for me when I was reading the book. I don't know. I'm getting the sense that you have more problem with the comment of the writer than the book itself.
Well, it's the I feel like regarding my interpretation of the book, I feel like his response raises more questions than it answers.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, maybe that's just me.
Yeah, actually, I think I mentioned it in the podcast that it was kind of a creepy Big Brother kind of thing. Yeah, and sci-fi nostalgia I kind of understand, but a robotic figure of authority is a little bit more horrifying than comforting for me. I mean, popular with the kids. In the book itself, adults didn't seem to like it as much, but it would freak me out, and I would not want that.
Yeah, I mean, Howdy Doody never arrested anyone for littering.
Yeah.
So you were telling me you saw something on the web about Erik Larsen.
Yeah, Erik Larsen, artist and writer and creator of the Savage Dragon, whom I've referred to in years past as the Savage Asshole because he summarily rejected a proposal that Kumar and I brought to him with one sentence. Cool, but not cool enough. Next. And it just rubbed me raw. But I kind of look at it now and think, he's not necessarily wrong there. Weird Crime Theater is a weird thing to bring to a guy and say, hey, man, yeah? This is like the first 13 pages of the book, which turned out to be 150 pages. And so I've kind of softened in my opinion of him. I don't know him, haven't spoken to him beyond that initial meeting. But on Twitter, someone posted an article by Comics Bulletin, which talks about a tweet that he made, where he said, "Comics are hard to break into if you're awful. If you do outstanding work, it is easy as hell to break into comics. This isn't the lottery. It's the Olympics. It's not a matter of buying a ticket. It's having what it takes to make the team." So basically the article deconstructs his statements. There were a couple more, but I'll let you read them. And basically says that what he is suggesting is supporting racist ideas. Maybe it's an oversimplification, but that was it.
So is that because he's implying that it's a completely level playing field for getting into comics when it actually isn't?
Well, I don't think he's intentionally implying it. I think he's unintentionally implying it.
Well, and I think sometimes when people say comics, they mean pamphlet comics that come out once a month. And, for the purposes of deconstructing comics and critiquing comics, the definition is much wider than that. Anything that's sequential art has been fair game for us to talk about.
Sure. Sometimes even non-sequential art. We've had one recently, yeah.
So I think it depends on what you mean by comics.
Yeah, I think that point is very correct. But just for my own take on his statement, I think Erik Larsen's Savage Dragon is not that interesting. And I base this purely on the artwork that I've seen. I'm really just not down for it, and never read one. That's it.
I haven't read it either, and I don't know.
It looks kind of like nonsense to me. So I just kind of like leave it there. And so if he's talking about if you're talented, sure. But my question is Erik Larsen talented, or at least more talented than other people in the comics industry who are not as successful? Yeah. So his statement.
Well, he could be talented, but just it's not to our taste.
Yeah, but that's the whole thing, right? So that's the whole argument. He's offering a subjective opinion as if it were the way things are. That if you don't have a job, it is purely because you don't have talent. And I think the point of racism that people are looking at is that it's a predominantly white male dominated industry, and so that means to say that people of color, women, any non-white male demographic you want to put there is not working there because they're just not talented. And that's where it gets really ugly.
Right. Well, I mean, a couple years ago now, it's been that long already, I went to Mocha, and, there were a lot of really talented people there who were, very diverse and mostly pretty young, not all of them.
Yeah.
But hardly any of them were or ever would work in mainstream comics because they're not doing the kind of material that would work in mainstream comics. And I think the problem there, mainstream comics have mostly, a certain set of ways of doing the comics that they'll accept that are the more kind of commercial ways of doing it.
Right.
Which, equally talented people who do different kinds of comics have, stand less of a chance of making a living at it, unfortunately. So, yeah, I would not agree with him that it takes just talent. You have to be willing to do certain kinds of comics, and for the most part, unless you're being published by Image, doing work for hire.
Well, even if you are being published by Image, it doesn't guarantee that you'll make enough money to live.
Yeah, that's for
From
sure.
what I understand, they have kind of a hands-off approach to advertising and whatnot, unless you are one of the top-tier comics. Apparently, their model is, and I don't know this through my own experience. I've only heard this through interviews and other people's, that their model is not to take a profit of the domestic sales of the book that you produce. They're just taking the printing costs. But for any overseas kind of thing that you do, that's where they take a percentage. So if you make it, maybe you can't see my air quote fingers, but if you make it in Image, they'll make money off of you. But if you don't, they won't. So perhaps one of the things that Erik Larsen, or perhaps Image, because there was some suggestion that this is a problem that Image has specifically, and Erik Larsen his comment is indicative of that. Is that they're hedging their bets with what they consider to be the most bankable project. White guys talking about white guys. That's it.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not really sure what the makeup of the weekly mainstream comics audience is, but the perception anyway is that that's also white guys.
I have no idea. I don't live in the States. I don't read mainstream comics anymore, and I haven't really been interested in that in a long, long time. I'm interested in publishing with anyone who will publish my work. So if Image is interested in publishing my work, fine. Slap a giant eye on the back and let's go. But aside from that, I mean, I occasionally read some of their books and occasionally buy some Dark Horse books, and very rarely I'll buy a DC book, and almost never I'll buy a Marvel book. But, good comics are wherever they come. But like I said in a previous podcast, or maybe earlier, uncommissionable works are much more interesting than stuff that's commissioned, or things that are made specifically with a certain type of audience in mind. I want to see the growth of the artist with the project that they're making. Yeah. And if there's not that, then for me it's just kind of boring. So that's kind of why I skip out on a lot of mainstream comics. There's nothing there for me. Every once in a while I see growth of an artist, but it's too slow, and there are no hard left turns in a mainstream comic. There can't be, because it's jarring. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if you'd like us to critique your work, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. So till next time, this is Tim.
But wait, there's more. So Tim, let me ask you, how are you doing?
Okay. Running out of time here today, but
We've got at least 2 or 3 minutes, man. I just want to know how my friend is doing in the world these days. I believe recently we were talking about some possibility of a resurgence of Tim Comics.
I haven't had time to get into that so far.
All right. I'll try not to harass you too much about it on podcast.
Okay, just off.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm waiting for an announcement, but I guess to be continued.
Okay.
All right. And Mulele.
And thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics.